Welcome to The Last of Us, an HBO Max live-action adaptation of the critically acclaimed video game of the same name from 2013. If you're unaware of what The Last of Us is as a game, it's a narrative-driven experience by developer Naughty Dog, revolving around Joel, a daughterless father, and Ellie, a fatherless daughter, who embark together on an adventure of terror and violence across a post-apocalyptic, mushroom-head-infested United States in search of a cure for the cordyceps strain that has all but wiped out humanity. Oh, no, Plato, I'm sure that all the domesticated pets are fine. Sarcastic? Me? No, of course not. The game featured brilliant visuals, exciting gameplay mechanics, and an incredibly immersive story that I was obsessed with when it came out. Seriously, this is coming from the guy that both bought the original game and its various remasters. After beating it several times in Afghanistan and wishing for years that they'd adapt it to a live-action series, my dreams finally came true. After I stopped wishing for a live-action series. The plethora of zombie-themed shows like The Walking Dead and all its spin-offs, as well as Z Nation, etc., that released since that time have desensitized me, to the point of groaning whenever a new post-apocalypse show comes about because the idea has been done so many times in so many ways that it's hard to find things that are refreshing about them. The Last of Us manages to transcend most of these things and be highly entertaining, but also suffers from the same dilemma. To be fair, there are many moments in the first episode of this series that were done incredibly well, including and mostly limited to the scenes taken directly from the games, like the car ride into the city from Sarah's point of view, or the scene of Sarah's inevitable death. I enjoyed every minute of what was directly adapted from that. The show pulls off the atmosphere and the production value effectively, and they did not disappoint when those scenes occurred. What did disappoint were the scenes that were added in or changed, which were boring, forced, and cliché. Why does this keep happening? Well, I've come to realize that it's inevitable for live-action adaptations of source material to have changes made to make the story more serviceable to people who are new to a franchise. The problem that exists within HBO's The Last of Us series, though, is that they change all the things that don't matter, and things that will most definitely contradict the story as more episodes release. What I find strange is that Neil Druckmann appears to be trying way too hard to rewrite his own story that was good all on its own, to appeal to people who don't even care about his story. You see, he was the writer for the original game, and unfortunately, he was also the writer for the second game. And if you've played the second game, then it's safe to assume you probably know what happens to Joel. Well, buckle up, because now he's the writer for this show too, which is why so many of the scenes that they've added to the series make no sense to me, as well as the changes to the main characters. The original game was narrative-driven. It was tailored like a movie, and told like a movie. Quite simply, in my opinion, a masterpiece. Why they ever thought they had to change anything about it is beyond me, because the changes they did make are dumb. Let's start with the characters. I know, right? Gosh, it took me long enough. Joel, played by Pedro Pascal, has been transformed from a hulking mass of a man willing to do anything to survive and protect the ones he cares for, into, as per usual, an overly dependent wimp who relies on women of the series to get anything done. This is the complete opposite of Joel in the game, who is a weapons dealer that takes charge, makes decisions, and takes BS from literally nobody. The show depicts him as an incompetent and toxic male who is violent and apathetic from the very beginning, rather than naturally developing those traits from being forced to survive over the span of 20 years. And even 20 years prior, he can't even get out of bed or make himself breakfast without the help of his young daughter, Sarah. There's even a scene where Joel and his brother Tommy are discussing the location of some country or something stupid, and Sarah chimes in correcting them because of course she does. Does that conversation have anything to do with the plot of the show? No, it doesn't, and yet it's an added-in scene. It's clearly put there to show that the men in The Last of Us are stupid and need women's help to survive. This is honestly unforgivable when it comes to the main character, but unsurprising that they went this route. The same can be said for Tess, in that she has gone from being just as ruthless and violent as Joel to the voice of reason, kindness, and even has gotten into Joel's pants for some reason. Not to mention that they as a pair are no longer gun runners like in the games, but they're now just trying to acquire a car battery so that Joel can talk to his estranged brother after not hearing from him for more than one day, even though they had a falling out and have been estranged all this time. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm getting carried away, but it's really important to make note of these things because all of the added-in scenes are presumably designed to flesh out the story, and yet they only succeed in pulling you completely out of the story because it's written so differently from the directly adapted game scenes that they just don't fit together. A great example is the very first scene with Tess, who is now older and looks nothing like Tess as she negotiates with her kidnapper, who is afraid of her, but also has her restrained and is begging her not to tell anyone that he beat her up and kidnapped her. This doesn't even happen in the game at all, by the way. This is the first in what is likely to be an endless string of unnecessary scenes, and I'm certain that they don't plan to use random sudden explosions to save you from their idiocy. Oh. Yeah, I'm fine. The beginning of the show itself is almost entirely unnecessary. The beauty of the original Last of Us is that it threw you directly into the fray after only a short introduction and encouraged you to follow its plot so that you could discover exactly how the world fell and why. And as you progress, you learn more about the cordyceps strain and how transmissible it is as a disease by exploring spore-infested areas, conversing with other characters of the Last of Us universe, and by simply allowing the plot to speak for itself by showing you what's going on rather than telling you. Well, we don't get that here. From the start, we're subjected to a 1960s interview where a crapload of exposition is dumped on us as the entire audience goes deafeningly quiet when the guest scientist is explaining how a potential strain like cordyceps is formed from the dangers of global warming? But what about the climate? Did he just say the climate? After that, we get 20 to 30 minutes of following Sarah around while she blissfully ignores the world falling apart around her and even pursues very clear and obvious danger at moments where she should be running for her life and seeking safety. There's a scene where she's sitting in class staring at the clock, which I found ironic since I looked down at my own watch several times wondering when the scene would end, and I noticed her watching a kid whose wrist is twitching, and I couldn't tell if it was due to the cordyceps strain or if we as the audience were being shown that Sarah just really wanted to buy her dad a watch. And while I appreciated that little tidbit, it doesn't detract from the fact that we're being forced to watch these boring scenes with her. And for what reason? The contradiction of Sarah's personality doesn't add to her development, and in fact, it just takes away from her development. Her character is shown to be highly intelligent and responsible, a girl who is so smart that she's educating her own father and uncle, who are in their mid-30s, or taking care of an elderly couple day after day after school, but when it comes to protecting herself and making sound, reasonable decisions, Sarah's character falls for every horror trope and cliche in the book, every time. Mrs. Adler? Mrs. Adler! The biggest complaint I have is Bella Ramsey as Ellie. Oh my goodness. Bella does not look anything like Ellie, nor does she have that adorable but quirky catty quality that Ellie has. Her introduction is jarring, and the way that they portray her relationship with Marlene, the Queen of the Fireflies, doesn't click well. You would think that Neil Druckmann, who wrote the original game, would find an effective way to make sense of the gaps in the game's narrative and apply it to the show's production, but for some reason he just doesn't, and instead creates scenarios that don't work to try and explain away the things that do, and it makes the show worse off. It feels so much less like an adaptation that's come into its own, and more like a show trying to deconstruct and redefine the original video game. In terms of character development, the actors play their roles well, but they have not yet truly embodied their characters. Not yet. Perhaps that will change further down the line, perhaps not, but I feel it's noteworthy to point out how much they're acting like they're in The Last of Us, rather than just being in The Last of Us. You know what I mean? Well, Plato doesn't see what I mean. The only character I felt was truly accurate was Marlene, which is easy for me to say since the same actress literally played Marlene in the video games. She plays the part of the leader of the Fireflies perfectly. Imagine if they had done that with the other characters. Just imagine. In terms of action, there isn't a lot of it past the prologue, and specifically in places where there should be action. I'm kind of over the whole "we're showing you the aftermath of a fight" to salvage budget costs, but this is ridiculous. They skip so much of the action from the game and replace that action with people saying, "We know what you're capable of," or "your friend scares me." I don't think it works, and I can already see the comments saying, "You just love it because you're a toxic male. That's the only reason you like violence. It troubles me that a good chunk of reviewers out there are willing to accept these red flags only because the show looks pretty, looking at you, Rings of Power, or accurately depicts crucial game scenes, but I really do feel that the quality of the show is entirely dependent on how many scenes they pull straight from the games, because so far everything already established is superb, but everything new that they've added and everything that they've changed, especially in terms of character growth, drags the show down and will continue to do so moving forward. They break the rule of show don't tell so many times in this first episode that it's hard to imagine that they'll stop doing that as the show goes along. it's really not the worst thing I've ever seen. And overall, I found it really enjoyable. It's a well-made show. Again, there are truly amazing moments in this series, but that doesn't mean we should ignore its problems, because those issues that may seem small now could become much bigger in the future. And if everyone gets so unreasonably hyped up and comfortable with what they're watching, then they're setting themselves up for massive disappointment. Even the good reviews out there are making note of the suspicious direction that The Last of Us appears to be going in, and some are reserving judgment, which I think is the best way to go about it. If you've never played the game, you probably think that this is the best adaptation on television, which is understandable, no judgment there. My opinion originates from experiencing the game before the show, while others may be experiencing the show before the game. And if that's the case, they're going to have two noticeably different experiences. That's a tough area to navigate because there's a level of bias involved. But what I try to remember is that while the first episode is really good so far, it raises a lot of questions, and those questions are in part being asked by me because I know what happens to Joel in the second game. I, as a fan of The Last of Us, know where this show is headed, and I already know that I'm going to despise the second season unless they divert from the original plot of the second game. And if they don't, I guarantee that a lot of people who are new to the show and are enjoying it right now are going to be very, very angry later on. That being said, I hope you all enjoyed my review. Like and share this video, and if you'd like to see more of my content, consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell. I look forward to seeing you all again next time. Say goodbye, Play-Doh. Meow meow.